All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Dave, me, and Nick here. We're doing our preview and prediction for the Alabama Crimson Tide for the 2022 season. Look at this coaching staff. Nick Saban, he's back for his 16th season, 178-25 record. That is absurd. 15 10-plus win campaigns here at Alabama, and they should be in for a 16th straight as well. Bill O'Brien's the offensive coordinator, his second season, likely his final season in Tuscaloosa. He should get a head coaching job more than likely at the end of this season or find his way back in the NFL. Pete Golding, fifth season on staff. He's the defensive play caller. Crimson Tide, phenomenal work in the transfer portal. Second-ranked recruiting class. Then they got 3 of the top 10 prospects in the portal. They didn't add a lot of guys from the portal, but the guys they did were high-impact transfers. We're going to start with this offense. Bryce Young, 40 points per game last season with his guidance. 4,800 yards, 47 touchdowns. You expected big things out of him, Nick, but he really had to carry the offense at times. It was mainly because this offensive line, they're outside of the top 120 in sacks and tackles for loss allowed. They had 11 tackles for loss allowed against Auburn. They get back both guards, though, in Javion Cohen, Emil Ikior, and I think J.C. Latham and Tommy Brockmeyer might spot their way into the lineup this year. The run game suffered. Depth was a problem somehow. Robinson still had his 1,300-plus yards, but there were games where it wasn't effective. They had 6 rushing yards against LSU, for example. Auburn, of course, that was a big issue that night. What are your thoughts on this offensive line that is guaranteed to improve, especially with the addition of Tyler Steen, left tackle veteran from Vanderbilt?
Last year wasn't a typical Nick Saban season in Tuscaloosa. They struggled in a lot of games they shouldn't have. They struggled against Arkansas. They struggled against LSU at home. These are games they normally be putting away early in the first half. It just didn't seem like things were working for Alabama. Bill O'Brien looked like he was going to be on the out. People were linking him to the Patriots. That move never came to fruition. Pete Golding's defense seemed to be a little shaky at first. They got better as the season went on. And like you said, the offensive line was just very poor last year. Outside of Evan Neal, it really just didn't – no one really stood out, and Bryce Young was seeming to have to battle to protect himself. He had to make a lot of plays on his own. He did have 47 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, and, of course, he won the Heisman during the season. What was considered a down season by some, Alabama still wins the West and the SEC before going to the national championship game and losing to Georgia. But I love what they did in the portal. Tyler Steen is such a talented player. He stands out at Vandy. You watch the tape, he's a standout figure. You always see him making moves, making good blocks. He is such a talented left tackle. He fits in perfectly for this team. Nick Saban has grown to love the portal. He has made some great moves in the portal. He's done the same thing for the wide receiver core and the running back as well with Jahmyr Gibbs. I think this is a great addition. Steen might be the best pick out of the portal at the end of the season based off just how he looks on the tape at Vanderbilt. I'm excited to see what this offensive line can do. I think the Brockmeyer brothers, like you said, have real potential to step up and be impact players for this team.
J.C. Latham likely gets the start at right tackle, and of course Steen at left. Seth McLaughlin, Darian Dalcourt, I think that's one position that's really up for grabs. I think the rest of the starters, though, are penciled in that battle I just talked about. It was at center, if I didn't already previously mention that. The running game, though, I think these guys will take a big step forward this year. Jahmyr Gibbs, they add him a dual-threat back, explosive, very shifty, 5'11", 200. The traits are impressive for that size. He comes over from Georgia Tech, where he also made an impact as a kick returner. I'm a big fan of Jace McClellan, who unfortunately was not healthy last year, and they really needed him down the stretch. They lacked playmaking in the backfield in some games. Trey Sanders, he was that number 2 back, but he struggled sometimes to show explosiveness. He was tough, but big plays were hard to find at times on the ground. They kind of lacked that speed, I thought, last year in the backfield, but they had plenty of toughness because that's what Robinson did. He runs behind his pads phenomenally. This running game will improve, and I think the running game will improve with it, not just because you expect the O-line to progress, but I think the backs they have, the talent, these guys will step up and do what they're supposed to, like we usually see out of Alabama running backs.
I agree. Grabbing Gibbs out of the portal is a guy who has a ton of speed. You look at the tape at Georgia Tech, stands out, such a talented player on special teams as well, kick returns. I don't know if Nick Saban will put him on kick returns. That is yet to be seen. I would personally be against that decision. I'd like to keep him healthy as possible. But you never know. Nick Saban likes to have those explosive guys on kick returns. We've seen it with Jalen Waddle and John Mechie in the past. I think Jahmyr Gibbs is some serious talent. I love what he can do, all-purpose back. He's going to ground and pound, and I love the speed he has. I also think Jace McClellan coming back from his injuries is very important. Like you said, he's such a talented back, but the injury bug just bothered him last year. He couldn't quite put it together. Only got about 150 yards total last season. It's going to be interesting to see what this offense can do on the ground. I expect Bill O'Brien to transition a little bit and focus on the running game a little bit more, even though Bryce Young has so much talent, to kind of give the load off him so he doesn't have to make plays and make bad decisions.
McClellan and Gibbs, they have similar traits and similar size, so I think it's going to be tough for opponents this year to defend this Alabama backfield. They have a little bit of everything, I think. Look at this receiving core. Like you just said, keep Gibbs off special teams, but they had Jamison Williams, a 1,500-yard receiver, as a gunner on the punt team. They also, they lose John Mechie as well. 2 1,100-yard pass catchers are gone. They got injured at the back half of the season. That was obviously a big deciding factor in the national championship game. But regardless, those guys are gone. Ajayi Hall transfers out. Wide receiver group is very interesting. You got Ja'Cory Brooks. He didn't make many plays in the title game. He's going to be leaned on the step up this year. Jermaine Burton, though, a very valuable asset from the portal. Vertical speed, that's what he possesses. I expect a 1,000-yard season from him. Talk about vertical speed. Tyler Harrell, he provides speed in a variety of different ways. He allegedly runs a 4.24. They're going to get him involved in, I think, a variety of different ways, downfield and in, the short passing game with, potential bubble screens, jet sweeps, that kind of action from him. Shaz Preston, Kobe Pratis, JoJo Earl, those are some of the big names that I'm expecting to step out this season. How do you feel about a receiving core? It's kind of iffy at the moment and lacked playmaking from its younger guys, at least against Georgia, for all the marbles.
A lot of turnover in the wide receiver core. Since the offensive line added the addition of Tyler Steen, I felt a lot better about them. Now I feel a little concerned about this wide receiving core, but they did make moves in the portal. Jermaine Burton comes from Georgia, had a good season for the Bulldogs last year. I expect him to step up and be a 1,000-yard receiver. And Tyler Harrell, that speed is just unreal. He kind of looks like Jameson Williams with that speed, a very decent comparison between those two. Will he be able to put up the same type of numbers Jameson Williams did? That is yet to be seen. And JoJo Earl is the man that I'm hoping has the breakout season. I love JoJo Earl. I like his work ethic. He always puts the effort in practice, from what I understand. I want to see him step out and make some good plays. Didn't quite put together last year, 10 games, 12 catches for 148 yards, good for about 12 yards per catch. I'm excited to see what he can do. JoJo Earl is going to be my breakout player on this offense for the wide receivers, I hope, this year.
And they do lose 5 of their top 6 pass catchers, with Cam Latu being the only returner, 26 receptions for 410 yards and 8 touchdowns. He was in the end zone a lot last year against Georgia. He stepped up. He also had a pair, I think, against Miami to kick off the year as well. So Cameron Latu, we expected Jaleel Billingsley to be the star tight end. It ended up being him. He showcased some nice abilities there in the national championship game. He was one of those guys that certainly stepped out. Looking at this defense, they were very stout versus the run after the Florida game, where positioning was an issue, especially in the linebacking group. Henry Tioto, he really struggled, but he caught fire towards the back half of the season. 2.6 yards per carry last year, and that was 4th in the nation, 86 yards per game. They allowed almost 250 to Florida. They could not get a stop. If there was more time in that game, they probably would have lost. That's how poor they were against the run. The rest of the season, though, they were really good. Of course, they gave up a big run against Georgia and the Natty, and then they almost ripped off a few runs in the SEC title game. For the most part, I was very pleased with the bounce back they had in the trenches. Byron Young, he comes back. Depth on this defensive line, it's not great, but I think they're stacked outside linebackers so much they'll be all right. E.J. Dale, another guy coming back. Tim Smith at nose tackle. Jaheim Otis, 6'5", 370. That's a guy that I really like. And again, the pass rushing duo of Anderson and Turner is very scary. We'll get to them in a second. What are your thoughts, though, on just the 3-man lineup they're going to roll out with on the D-line?
It's very important that Byron Young and DJ Dale both came back. Some questions, especially about Byron Young, whether he'd come back. 33 total tackles last year for him, 7.5 tackles for loss, plus 2 sacks. I really like what he can do. I think he's such a talented player and has a real potential. DJ Dale as well, 18 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 2 sacks. Those two together, I'm expecting them to take a little bit of step up this year. Some people were disappointed in Tuscaloosa with their performance last year. Can they step up a little bit and add some sacks total, maybe add some total tackles for loss? Let's see what they can do for sure.
And now the focus on this pass rush duo of Anderson and Dallas Turner. It's probably going to be the nation's best by far. Anderson, these stats are insane. 101 tackles, 33.5 tackles for loss, 17.5 sacks. His get-off is ridiculous. His athleticism, his ability to collapse, make plays off the edge. It was absurd. They line him up on both sides of the ball. Doesn't matter where they put him. They could put him on the interior, and he'd probably be a phenomenal nose tackle as well. That's just how good Will Anderson is. And Dallas Turner, of course, he stepped up late in the year. He was my pick to be the MVP in the national title game. He had 2+ sacks in that game, so he was certainly well on his way to getting some type of honor. End of the year with 10 total tackles for loss and 8.5 sacks. I love Dallas Turner. He showcased some of the same abilities as Anderson. This is going to be a ridiculous pass rushing duo for the Crimson Tide.
You and I were both high on Dallas Turner. I think you remember early on in the season, I told a lot of folks at Tuscaloosa that Dallas Turner was going to be that guy that was going to step up. He started off slow, and I just loved how he developed, and I was such a fan of him. Everyone knew that this was a guy that I supported and really picked to kind of break out. 8.5 sacks during his first season in Tuscaloosa. Incredible performance from him. And, of course, Will Anderson, what can you not say about him? Heisman has to be a Heisman finalist potentially. A favorite in some people's boat. 17.5 sacks, 31 tackles for loss, 101 total tackles last year. Just a dominant force. I would not want to be an SEC quarterback having to go against Will Anderson and then have Dallas Turner on the other side. That is an absolute terrifying pass rush to go against. Those two are going to be absolutely dominant this year. I expect Will Anderson to potentially get 20 sacks this year, and Dallas Turner can easily hit double digits this year.
Yeah, Turner, he had one tackle for loss in the first 7, 8 games. Over the final 7, he had at least one in every single game. So he certainly turned it on late in the season. The interior linebacking core, they lose Drew Sanders. He transfers out, so the depth is going to be a little concerning. Demoy Kennedy, number 3 linebacker recruit in 2020. And then Deontay Lawson, also a former top 50 recruit. Just limited experience for those guys, but they might be action. I like Jalen Moody. I'm glad he stuck around. I think he piqued some interest in the portal early in the offseason. He stays. Made some nice plays in the Arkansas game back in 2020. That he started in that game. He finally gets an opportunity here to crack the lineup alongside Henry Teoto, the Tennessee transfer, who had 112 stops last year. And again, he immensely stepped up as a run supporter. I like what he provides. Overall, this front 4, front 7, I like what they have as a whole, especially up front at linebacker. How do you feel about this defense's front?
Henry Toto, the quarterback of that defense, really commands it on the field. A lot of people are disappointed in his performance last year in Tuscaloosa, which is crazy considering he led the team in tackles with 112 total tackles. But people expect him to step up a little bit and add a little bit more of an interesting impact. He kind of had a slow start to the season, kind of came into his own in the second half of that season. I love what he can do as a leader. He, like I said, quarterbacks the defense, going to be the man in charge. I like to see what he can do. I definitely think it's important that Jalen Moody stayed. He only played in 6 games last year for 11 total tackles, but I think he has some serious untapped potential and could really make some important impacts in this team.
One of the predictions I made for Alabama last year is they would have one of the nation's top secondaries, and they were far from it. The secondary allowed the 3rd most pass touchdowns in the SEC. They're also 7th in the conference in yards per game allowed. Eli Ricks, though, he comes over from LSU, excellent in man, a physical press corner. A lot of people consider him the nation's top corner. They go out and get him in the portal. Kool-Aid McKinstry, Kyrie Jackson, he wasn't great in the national title game. They're going to battle for CB2. I think Kool-Aid has the edge there. Jordan Battle, he's one of the best safeties in college football, very physical. They also get DeMarco Hellams back. Both these guys are veterans. I think the slot is interesting to watch because Malachi Moore didn't have the year we expected last year, but Brian Branch, he stepped up nonetheless. Either of these guys can play safety as well, so they have plenty of guys that can play wherever. Branch, he's the more versatile with his violent intentions off the edge. He had 5 tackles for loss, 9 pass breakups. Not all of those came in the back end. He made pass breakups off the edge, 2 of them each in the SEC title game and the Cotton Bowl. So he was so good for them down the stretch. I think he's kind of locked up that slot spot. But Malachi Moore, where's he fit into all this?
It was disappointing to see Malachi Moore's season last year. He had such a great second half of his freshman season in 2020. He started off poor in the Texas A&M game and the Ole Miss game, but he really turned it around and became a fan favorite in Tuscaloosa. A lot of people expected big things out of him, and it just didn't work out for Malachi Moore last season. It was so disappointing to see it for him. 9 games, 16 total tackles, just didn't really seem to be involved in it. It seemed to be a little bit out of the picture. But I also think the secondary has a ton of talent, and I think they're definitely trying to take a step forward this year. Eli Ricks, coming from LSU, very talented player, limited experience last year because of the injuries, but I think he has the potential to step up and be a dominant force. Jordan Battle, love what he can do, such a talented safety. He is such a great player, and he can really sort of be that sort of top man in the secondary, and I really like to see if he can lead this team throughout this season.
That leads us to the schedule preview and prediction. Nothing but green, 12-0. First 2 weeks, they're not cakewalks. Utah State was a really good team last year. They won double figures, won the Mountain West. They did not allow many big pass plays in the secondary last year, but they cannot stop the run, so I think you're going to see a big day from the backs there. Bryce Young, it might be a 200-yard game on 20 attempts. I think that's how good they'll be at running the ball. Week 2 at Texas, this is a big-time game. It's going to be 11 a.m. kickoff Central Time. This is a phenomenal offense Texas brings to the table. At least on paper, Quinn Ewers will be a second start, but he does have the luxury of being at home. The Texas defense, they're not that impressive, but this offense can certainly cause you some fits. So the first 2 weeks, very interesting for Bama. I think they'll win both of those games. I think they're 15-point favorites right now over Texas. Will they cover? More than likely so. ULM after that, Vanderbilt. And then they get some tests here. At Arkansas, as they host A&M, who they're trying to get some revenge on. Then at Tennessee, some very ferocious offenses. And then a big, nasty A&M team in the trenches who also possess an interesting secondary. How do you feel about that stretch there in October?
The schedule across the board is very interesting for me with Alabama. You see them scheduling Utah State at home to kick off the season. That'll be a 6 o'clock kickoff. Bit of a nice sunset game for Alabama at home. I like to see that. Then they travel to Texas. First true non-conference road test since they played Penn State in Happy Valley in 2011. I'm really interested to see what that's going to be like. Very interested. We previewed Texas recently. They have some serious talent. Could they catch Alabama off guard? It's certainly possible. I wouldn't expect it, though. And then you look at that stretch, like you said, Arkansas, Texas A&M, Tennessee. Tennessee is getting a lot better. Alabama has dominated Tennessee for the better part of the last 15 years. That rivalry is not even really close anymore, and it hasn't been for a while. But now this Tennessee team with Hendon Hooker and what they've built there in Rocky Top could really give Alabama some trouble. That's a game to watch out for. A&M, of course, beat Alabama last year in College Station. It was a crazy game. I don't think they're going to beat them this year. I think Alabama will come back and dominate Texas A&M. But then Arkansas also gave Alabama some trouble at home last year. Treylon Burks absolutely dominated Alabama. He was physical. He really showed Jordan Battle up. Jordan Battle looked terrible that day against him. This schedule, it's your typical SEC West schedule for Alabama. 12-0 is definitely right where they belong. Very talented Nick Saban team, but it's a little bit different when you grab in that Utah State and Texas game out of conference.
Treylon Burks is gone, as is Josh Yoe, got torched that day, so I think they'll be all right against Arkansas, at least on that front. At LSU and at Ole Miss, I think those are the real final two tests. Of course, they have the Iron Bowl to cap things off before they head to the SEC championship game. Auburn, of course, last year they almost surprisingly knocked them off. That game can go either way, but I think LSU, Ole Miss, those are the final two tests. Ole Miss, of course, they have an offense that can challenge anybody. The defense, the last 2 years, has just been grinded down on. They cannot stop the run against Alabama this year, they'll be no different. 12-0 for me, 12-0 for you. When we make our playoff predictions, I'm almost certain this will be my national championship pick just because they get two Heisman finalists back. I know Anderson's not invited. I don't care. He was a finalist. They get two of them back on both sides of the ball. Their offensive line struggled, as did the secondary. Those are two things we typically never see from Alabama, so they're obviously going to get those corrected. Those are going to be big focal points. And I think this team, their winning margin is going to be 25 to 30 points. I think they're just going to hammer everybody. They're going to be that angry because last year was a very strange season. And then I think this team will be 15-0 come January. What are your final thoughts on Alabama before we wrap this up?
Yeah, for me, they're absolutely my national champion at this moment in time. They addressed the holes in the offense that they needed to. The offensive line, they got Steen out of the portal. That was a major hole. They addressed it. Nick Saban also taxed the portal, addressed the holes on the wide receiver after losing Jameson Williams and John Mechie. They grabbed Burton and Tyler Harrell. They addressed the holes they need to address. They get Gibbs as well at running back. They bring in the piece on defense, Eli Ricks. Nick Saban has built this team. This is one of his best rosters in a very long time, with Will Anderson and Bryce Young leading the way on offense and defense, respectively. This is such a talented team. They're going to run the score up all year, and they should easily be national champions.
That's me for today, guys. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.
Thank you so much, guys.